In this video, I'm going to talk about implementing Azure Backup in a hybrid scenario. A couple of topics that I want to cover in this video is why using Azure as a backup target, followed by the deployment of Azure Backup by using an Azure Backup agent, installing it in my on-prem environment, and then walking you through a second possible option to configure Azure Backup by using Azure Backup Server. Again, installing it in your on-prem environment and pushing out backups to Azure, where I'd like to start with the first one. Why and how to use Azure as a backup target. Now, interesting part is that Azure provides you basically unlimited storage at a pretty affordable price. So a lot of the typical traditional backup solutions also provide integration with Azure storage. To name just a few of them, Veeam, Commvault, Symantec, and this list is not even complete. Azure itself also provides Azure backup solutions, allowing you to take full backups from your on-premises application servers, running Windows, running Linux, and storing them into Azure, giving you some advantages where Azure backups are encrypted by default. The traffic itself, so the fact that your data is being pushed into Azure storage vault, into the backup vault, is already secured, encrypted with an SSL certificate, as well as the data being stored in Azure is nowadays also being encrypted. And then having the other advantage that Azure Recovery Vault provides a retention time up to 99 years. Now, deploying an Azure Backup isn't really complicated. Azure Backup, the agent-based version, however, only allows you a backup of files and folders. The backup is agent-based, which means you do partly the configuration in Azure, creating the vault, selecting the target job, and then downloading the agent, installing it on your Windows machine or Linux clients on your on-premises environment, scheduling the backup job, and even performing restores is also done from the server or the client itself. It's not really happening from the Azure portal. Now, the Azure Backup Agent, the initial version, Azure Backup, allows you for file and folder backup. Now, in most situations, enterprises are looking for a more advanced backup solution. And that's why Microsoft introduced Azure Backup Server a couple of months ago, where Azure Backup Server is an enterprise-ready backup solution, allowing for full application integrated server backups to an Azure Recovery Vault. It supports Windows Server, running Exchange, SharePoint, SQL, and even Linux machines. The Azure Backup Server, or MABS in short, is 95% identical to System Center Data Protection Manager, the enterprise-oriented backup solution out of Microsoft that exists for more than 10 years already. But this one is licensed through Azure, and it's hard-coded, required to use Azure as a backup target. But then again, configuration is done from within the backup server itself, running in an on-prem scenario. So that's a quick wrap-up of using Azure Backup for an on-prem scenario. I'm going to start with a first demo showing you Azure Backup, and then jumping over to a second server where I'm running Azure Backup Server. So what I'm running here is my Windows server, Hyper-V host, on which I installed Azure Backup. Now let me show you quickly how it works from the Azure portal. So I'm back in my Azure portal, and I'm going to create a new vault in the same way as I showed you in the previous video, where now I'm going to select where my workload is running. This time it's not running in Azure, it's running on premises, and I have to select what I want to backup. If I'm interested in files and folders, or if I want to backup full Hyper-V VMware hosts or application-aware backups. If I'm selecting files and folders, then it will force me to download an agent as well as download the vault credentials, which I have to execute, register my server, my backup server within 2 days. Otherwise, the vault security will be voided and I have to redo the configuration. So on my Windows machine, I installed the Recovery Services agent, the default credential configuration, which basically is a next finish. Didn't want to spend too much time in this recording on how to install the agent. And then allowing me from my Windows machine to start up my Microsoft Azure backup, which maybe you're a bit familiar with the typical Windows backup for Windows Server 2012 R2, 2012, 2008, 2008 R2. It's almost an identical system. From where I can schedule a backup, I can run a manual backup and obviously also recovering data. Now let's say I want to schedule a backup job. It's checking some policies, verifying that I have communication with Azure. And since I'm already configured the backup job on this server, it will propose me to make changes to my existing backup job. So let's say I want to remove my data drive, only taking backups of my C drive and maybe adding another folder. It allows me 3 backup timeframes per day, or if you want also a weekly backup. And then at the same time, or the same way of selecting Azure backup virtual machine backups, it also integrates with a daily, weekly, monthly and yearly retention policy. And then finishing the job, it will pick up the scheduled task and then pushing out my backup information directly to Azure. At the same time, if I want to recover my data from this local machine, browsing for my files, it will talk to my Azure recovery points, showing me a calendar with all my latest backup jobs that I have for this specific volume. And then it's nothing more than selecting the files and restoring the data. Restoring the data is possible to the server itself. I also have the option to point to a remote server, and then since the data is encrypted, I need to provide the decryption key. Now let me jump over to the second possible feature out of Azure Backup, which is called Azure Backup Server. In the exact same way as I configured in the portal before, instead of selecting files and folders, I select any of the other options: Hyper-V Server, Virtual VMware, or Exchange, SharePoint, or SQL. Instead of downloading the Azure Backup agent, I'm now proposed to install the Azure Backup Server option, again including the Azure Vault registration key, running the setup on my Windows machine, and then the console looks like this. So from here, I can start with protection, creating a new protection job. Where it's again a wizard-based scenario, selecting my local server. Let's say I want to take backups of my SQL databases, giving it a name, and then again specifying retention, taking synchronization frequency, so it's application integrated every 15 minutes, for example. Short-term goals to a local disk subsystem. It's verifying if I have space available. Then basically completing next, finish, and done. Performing a consistency check, making sure that the data that's being backed up is being backed up in a consistent state. And then it starts my backup job. And then from here, as you can see, I have my short term using disk and then online protection as well. So it's a 2-line backup scenario. At the same time, if I want to perform a recovery, I'm selecting my recovery point, browsing through my files, and then executing the recovery job, which will download the files first from disk. Depending on your retention settings, it will pull down the information from the Azure Backup Vault, and then providing you the restored data, which completes my demo on using Azure Backup by using an agent in the first example and by using Azure Backup Server in the second example. Which brings me to the next video, in which I'm going to talk about Azure Site Recovery for high